Joshua took me behind a dumpster, far away from the midway section. His expression turned to more of a gruesome look. "My father," he said. "My father didn't die. He's out in the city somewhere." Joshua pushed the dumpster over a couple inches, revealing a raggedy old newspaper. He opened the contents, and this is what made my blood run cold. Since May, he had been out on the loose, and the city was trying to find him. How come I had never heard about a word about this till now? "I don't even know what happened to Adeline and Christopher during the sleepover," I said. "Maybe you know what happened?" "Well, they've obviously known since the beginning, since the start, but had never bothered telling us," Joshua replied. "I stole Chris's journal one day and managed to rip out an entry titled April 28th. "What did the contents say?" I asked. Joshua scoured through the newspaper. Using his hand, he removed all the dust on the newspaper, which revealed the journal entry that he was talking about, April 28th. I snatched the paper and read the contents. April 28th, transcribed by Joshua Franklin for easier reading. I found myself running out of Joshua's bedroom. Joshua is an overreactor and Leo is a follower. I ran downstairs to find Mr. Franklin in a rocking chair, knife clenched in his left fist, his eyes bulging with anger, and a group of devious men in the surrounding chairs. Adeline screamed, I screamed, and we were all sent down into this weird place. I heard the sound of somebody pacing around back and forth swiftly before their steps stopped. The only remnants of the steps were the echoes following. Then I felt somebody breathe down my neck. Adeline felt it too. We slowly turned around and were face to face with this weird person. "Shh," he said. "Be quiet and don't speak about this." I looked to my side and Adeline was gone. I don't want to write about this anymore, so I'll stop writing for now. That was the whole entry. To be honest, I loved reading that. I now had an idea of what happened to Adeline and Christopher, but there were still many holes within that journal entry. Literally, it was all torn up on the top, and when I read it, and many holes made by a pencil were splotched around in different places. "Do you know what happened about anything else that happened to them?" I asked Joshua, his gaze disappointingly facing the floor. "Nope," he muttered after a few seconds. "I'll tell you what happened to myself during the time we didn't see each other." "Go ahead," I said. Joshua took a quiet, deep breath before speaking. "I woke up in the cafeteria at the school. Then I was told by some huge man to get over to City Hall immediately. The man took me in his car and drove me over to the massive City Hall. And then you know what happened next," Joshua finished. I stood silently, looking at Joshua. The sound of those crowds was far away, and I only noticed that during the time me and Joshua were having an intense staring contest. It was eerie for whatever reason. I remembered him telling me that. I don't know why I'd forgotten. "And what happened to you?" Joshua asked, breaking the silence. I had already told him what happened. How could he forget? This was confusing, because I forgot what happened to him too, until he told me just then, and now he wants me to repeat everything that happened while we were separated. I thought I already told you," I replied. "No, you didn't," Joshua said. "Don't gaslight me." Joshua's teeth were clenched. I knew he hated being gaslighted. One time in 7th grade, I gaslighted him so badly that he had a breakdown and was sent home early. I wasn't gaslighting him that time. I was being entirely genuine. That's exactly what he told me, but he was getting more upset, so I let in and wasted about 2 minutes repeating the information that I had already told him in the past. "Are you sure you don't have amnesia or were zoned out when I told you that?" I asked subsequently after I finished repeating that information. Joshua gave me a piercing look. "No," he snapped in a booming voice. "Now shut up. Let's get back to where Adeline and Christopher are." Joshua started marching out from behind the dumpster. He was heading back into the crowds, most likely going to Adeline and Christopher. I followed close behind, though he was walking so quickly that a normal speed for walking wasn't enough to keep up with him. So, little bit later, we came back to the table Adeline and Christopher were sitting at. They were peacefully eating the food that they just bought. Joshua was fuming while I kept my composure. Adeline's constantly moving eyes caught us, and she put her food down to speak. "Where the heck were you guys?" she asked, her mouth stuffed with food. "Firstly, speak when you're finished eating," Joshua blurted out, "and secondly, it's none of your business." Darn. He was really not in a good mood. I had never seen him act like this in our entire 6-year friendship. This was really confusing to me. "Did Leo do something to you?" Christopher asked. Joshua shook his head. "Take your food with you so we can start heading on to the rides here," Joshua shrilled in leadership as he started walking down the midway section and out of sight. "Well," I said, breaking the silence between all of us except Joshua. "Let me know when you guys are done with your food so we can follow Josh." Adeline and Christopher nodded. I patiently waited for them to finish their food before we all followed Joshua. I couldn't stop thinking about everything I learned and how I and Joshua both forgot about what we told each other. Christopher and Adeline were silently walking with me, about 20 feet behind Joshua. I noticed that the large crowds were mostly centered towards the tail end of the midway section. The number of times that all of us had to apologize for bumping into a stranger was an unfathomable amount. The wind had gotten stronger, and I could see hats and different objects being blown above our heads away in another direction. Festival music was being played, mostly silenced over the sound of the wind, but could still be heard by everyone. We continued walking, looking at every single ride we passed. Joshua had finally calmed down enough to walk with us, not 20 or so feet ahead of us, which was nice. While we were silently walking, Adeline noticed something that caught her attention. "Hey, look," Adeline said gleefully, pointing to a dome-like structure. "Do you guys want to go on that ride?" Everybody took a quick glance at what she was pointing at. The ride that piqued her interest was painted in bright green, and it had the wording UFO painted on the front of it. It was spinning aggressively when we noticed it, though despite that, it seemed incredibly enticing, and I hadn't heard of anything like this before at the fair. I'm down to go on this ride," I said. Christopher nodded, and so did Joshua. We all subsequently started walking towards the massive line that was parked in the front of the ride and got in the back of it. I noticed that when the ride stopped spinning aggressively and everyone was allowed out, multiple people were vomiting in the nearby bushes and grass. They all looked dizzy and sick. "Surely the ride isn't that bad to the point where you vomit, right?" Christopher sarcastically laughed. Joshua and I both crossed our arms and looked at Christopher with a smirk. Everybody knew what he did last year after a ride just like this UFO ride. After a few minutes of waiting in line, we got to the front rather quickly. Now we were right before the ride administrator. "Hello," greeted the ride administrator. How are you four doing today?" "We're doing good, sir," I said, handshaking the administrator. "Good to hear," replied the administrator with a smile on his face. "Please go over to the measuring stick to measure your height so we can make sure you're eligible for the ride," said the ride administrator, pointing over to a blue stick. All of us got our heights measured. I was 5'3", Christopher was 5'5", Joshua was 5 foot, and Adeline was 5'1". Everyone was eligible for the ride. The minimum height for it was 5 foot, so Joshua was lucky. So we walked up into the ride. The inside was extremely massive, and there were many seats with buckles lining up the perimeter of the dome. The walls inside were painted with aliens and planets, and it gave such an immersive feeling. Multiple people were already sitting down, buckled up and ready. "Whoa, this is cool," exclaimed Joshua in awe, his voice loudly echoing through the place. "Yeah, it looks unreal too," I whispered, trying not to speak loudly. "Where do we sit?" asked Christopher, looking around. "Over here," yelled Adeline across the dome, sitting down. Her feet were making an audible clink every time she took a step. All of us walked to where Adeline was. Christopher and Joshua sat next to Adeline, and I sat next to Joshua. A couple more people entered the ride before the door at the entrance closed, and a voice bellowed from the intercom. "The ride is starting in 30 seconds. Passengers, please fasten your seatbelts and hold on tight." All of our seatbelts were buckled tightly, so we were ready for the ride. "I hope this is fun," mumbled Adeline. "It will," I assured. Soon the ride started. It started out slow and then jolted to an extremely fast speed. We were being spun around, and I could feel myself flying, which was such a strange feeling. "Who said this ride was a spinny one?" Adeline whined. We were all getting extremely dizzy. No wonder everyone was walking out of the ride looking so dizzy and vomiting. I closed my eyes, wanting the ride to stop immediately. I heard Adeline start crying near me, and Christopher whispering some incoherent things, probably stuff like, "It'll be okay," and "Don't worry, it'll end soon." And Christopher was right. It felt like the ride ended as quickly as it started. Even though we were all dazed and felt like vomiting, we managed to leave the ride relatively unscathed. "That was so fun," Adeline said. We all knew she was lying. "Debatable," I muttered. All of us exited the ride and headed right, continuing on the large path. Rides were on both sides of the path, and many crowds were lined up in front of these rides. "What ride should we go on next?" Christopher asked. After Christopher spoke, a large crowd of people were running our way, and I saw a group of young boys behind that large crowd also running towards us. "Christopher!" yelled one of the boys. "Adeline!" yelled another one of the boys. "Leo!" yelled another boy, this time several other boys running to us. And "Joshua!" yelled another boy with high enthusiasm in his voice. "I knew I would find you guys." "Hey, how are you guys doing?" Adeline timidly asked in a calm tone. "We're doing great. We just wanted to say hi, of course," replied one of the boys. Yeah, what he said one of the young boys, backing up his friend. All of us looked at each other with confused looks. Joshua was trying to hold in laughter, and he was successful. After the kids took some photos, they wandered off as we went to an isolated part of the fair to look for other places to have fun. I wanted to go on the bumper cars, but I was thinking of saving the best for last. Should have gone on the bumper cars right then and there, now that I think about it. All of us continued walking all the way to the lone parts of the fairgrounds. Nobody was around here, and it was a somewhat tranquil feeling. The only thing around here besides the massive trees was one large gray building with the silver words maze printed on the front of it. Moss and foliage were growing on the concrete walls of this enigmatic building. "Hey, there's a maze over there. Want to go try it?" Joshua asked. Everyone stayed silent as we all approached the maze slowly. There was nobody around here, not even a rad administrator. "This seems a bit weird, but sure," Christopher said. I agree with Chris, but can we all stay in one group? I don't want to get lost," Adeline pleaded. "Can we instead go in groups of 2 and then split up around the maze? It'll be way funner that way," I said, wanting to get a better experience with this maze. "Okay, but if we do that, can I at least be with Chris?" asked Adeline gleefully. "You always get Chris. Why can't I get to hang out with Chris?" said Joshua in a louder tone. "Bro, don't fight over me. I'll go with Josh and Adeline. You can go with Leo," scoffed Christopher, now starting to walk into the maze abruptly. "Chris, wait," I yelled. "Check for anyone around here to see if we're allowed over here. We don't want to get in trouble." "Oh, whatever. Don't try stopping us. We're walking in despite whatever anyone says," said Christopher, storming on into the maze. "Well, I guess we're going now," mumbled Adeline. "Right. See you on the other end, Leo." Leo and Adeline, yelled Joshua, running up to Christopher. Adeline and I slowly walked into the maze, with our steps and breathing echoing throughout the building. The walls were made of bushes but still very smooth. "Who's going where?" asked Christopher. "I'll go right," I replied. Adeline agreed with me. "Okay, see you on the other end," said Joshua ecstatically, running down the left way. Adeline and I slowly walked into the right side of the maze. As we got deeper into the maze, more and more filled liquor bottles were lined up on the sides of the maze. The smell of cigarettes and weed became stronger as we progressed. It got so unbearable that I had to use my shirt to cover my nose. "This smells so bad," coughed Adeline. "Is this place littered with drugs?" I asked, coughing almost immediately after I said that. The outside light had dimmed significantly the more we progressed through the maze. A few seconds of silence led to me hearing 2 men across the maze cough violently. The atmosphere of this maze quickly turned into a weird feeling. My hands and feet turned numb quickly. I did a full 180 around my peripheral and noticed that Adeline left my side. The worst part was that we were at an intersection in the maze. She could have gone left, she could have gone right, but who knows? This is when my stomach started churning with fear. "Adeline!" I yelled loudly with a shake in my voice. I ran down the right side of the maze, now feeling a presence behind me. My feet stepped on the shards of glass everywhere, almost slipping on them. The walls turned from bushes to concrete, which was quite frightening. I didn't know why. I'd heard many men coughing violently from somewhere in the maze, maybe a couple yards away from me, and the smell of liquor and weed becoming stronger. "Leo, are you there?" yelled Christopher, his voice extremely faint. "Yeah, where are you?" I yelled back, worried. As I continued blindly navigating myself through the now pitch-black maze, I saw light at the end of a path I stumbled on and ran straight to it. Christopher hadn't yelled anything else, so I became extremely anxious and felt my face become cold with fear. I turned around and saw nothing behind me. Literally nothing. I saw a corridor leading from my path to the exit, so I sighed deeply as I walked to the exit. Before I got to the exit, however, I tripped on the many shards of glass on the floor and fell. Shards of glass were in my arms and legs, and I started bleeding relentlessly. "Crap!" I yelled in pain and agony. The floor quickly turned into a massive pool of blood, as I heard footsteps along with breathing soon preceding my falling. "Leo, we finally found you," rejoiced Christopher, with Joshua by his side. "Did you hear some men gossiping and smoking?" I groaned in pain. "What?" I asked, clenching my fist on the ground. "Did you hear some men gossiping and smoking?" asked Christopher again, seemingly without any care that I was on the floor bleeding. "You don't care that I'm bleeding on the ground with glass shards in my legs and arms?" I yelled, angry that my friend would do something like that to me. I looked around angrily, wanting to give Christopher a death stare. I couldn't see in the dark, so I assumed that nobody was there. Immediately, a very bright light lit up the space I was in. I turned my head and soon saw Christopher in front of me, standing with Joshua. "Chris? Josh?" I said timidly. Now I was flummoxed. What the heck is happening? "Are you okay?" asked Christopher, walking over to me. I attempted to get up off the dirty ground. "Yeah, I am," I replied, grunting loudly in pain while I swept off all the dirt from my blue shirt as I finally stood up. "Oh, you're finally here," said Joshua, turning around to stand up. "Where were you?" I looked at Christopher and then Joshua. Confused about what to say, I didn't speak, only looked at them. "Well, this is awkward," said Adeline, walking up behind me as I started to feel lightheaded. "Adeline, why did you leave me back there?" I asked angrily, angry that my friends did this to me. "And what happened to you? Are you okay?" Joshua said in an extremely terrified voice. The lethargy started hitting me big time, and I could barely keep my eyes open. My head collapsed to the floor, and my vision became blurry. "I'll try to bandage him up," said a voice that was sounding extremely faint. Looking up, I clenched my fist before attempting to stand up. A bright light hit me, and I closed my eyes tightly in response. A very faint chuckle was the next thing I heard. Were they really that clueless? My lethargy disappeared in an instant, and someone grabbed my arm. It was Joshua. I saw Adeline and Christopher before me, running up to a standing figure. The memory was all blurry, and as I'm writing this, I can't remember the details very well. "But Mr. Franklin?" asked Adeline. Her voice was shaky, and she gulped loudly after she spoke. "You guys are so credulous. This was all a setup to get you guys outside of the fairground so we can kill you," said Mr. Franklin in a peal of laughter that reenacted those hellish scenes of the first ordeal. I stood up before collapsing again. My legs were chained down to the floor. The exit of the maze that I saw earlier wasn't there. It was just a massive stone wall. "He's chained to the floor, all right, so now's the perfect opportunity to kill you guys mercifully," said Mr. Franklin in a nefarious voice. "We only chained him to the ground so he could stop bleeding and he could stop trying to stand up," said Joshua, starting to tear up. "Oh, son," said Mr. Franklin, "remember what I taught you about killing Leo?" "Killing who?" I asked, my voice extremely faint. "Yes, I remember," Joshua replied. "If it makes you spare my life, I'll kill him right now." I heard the sound of metal objects being thrown on the ground. A few of them landed right next to my arm. "Use any one of those weapons to decapitate him," said Mr. Franklin, laughing hysterically. Oh, I love watching agony occur. I heard the footsteps of what I surmised to be Joshua walking up to me, and soon the clattering sound of him picking up a knife. A teardrop fell on my arm. Joshua was crying as I felt the knife get closer to my throat. "Don't be timid, just do it. It'll be quick and fast," said Mr. Franklin in a burst of creepy laughter. "Count down from 3, Joshua." I heard Joshua gulp loudly. I clenched every part of my body, waiting for my demise. 3, 2, 1, and now! Exclaimed Mr. Franklin. I heard the sound of someone falling down precede the counting. Adeline shoved Joshua down. The sound of glass breaking rang through my ears, and I could feel my body return to normal. "Adeline!" grunted Mr. Franklin. "Darn it!" yelled Joshua in pain. Mr. Franklin managed to grab my collar as I managed to open my eyes. His face had grown a long beard, and he was wearing glasses. "I'll kill you this way," whispered Mr. Franklin, smiling. His breath smelled horrible. "You're a terrible human. I hope you know that," I muttered before he grabbed my throat and started throttling me. "You think you can escape my plans?" Mr. Franklin asked as I started to gasp for air loudly. I looked at him with such anger and desperation. Why was he asking that? Why? I blacked out soon afterward with no recollection of what happened.